enjoying EUROUT and learning a lot, as me. This hour is going to be the first speaker spotlight hour, and this means that we're going to have 3 amazing guests, and we're going to have like kind of like TED Talk style speeches. So let me introduce Jackie Lloyd, and please give her a round of applause.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for that, and thank you for coming to listen to me this morning. So as it says up there, I'm Jackie Lloyd. I work at City, based at Canary Wharf. I've been there for 5 years, and I work in our talent acquisition team, heading up apprenticeships and other diversity programs. I've also, for the past 4.5 years, been the co-chair of our Pride network within the bank. So I'm going to just spend a little bit of time telling you a little bit about, a bit about me, a bit about my experience, some of the things I've kind of learned along the way. I'm not one of those people who can say that they knew from a very young age that they were gay. I know lots of people can reference time in their life when they were very, very young and they were very clearly knew about themselves and their identity. It wasn't the case for me. It took me a really, really long time to figure this out. And actually, I kind of attribute that to the fact that there were no openly LGBTQ people in my life. I didn't knowingly meet any LGBTQ people. I'm sure there probably were some, but there were none that were visible or open or out. And it was really, really quite challenging for me to kind of figure out who I was. I think most of you are kind of familiar with the sort of old adage of you can't be what you can't see. And actually not being able to see anybody that I kind of identified with or that I could sort of relate to was kind of particularly challenging for me. I also grew up during the time of the Section 28 or Clause 28 Local Government Act. So most of you are not as old as I am, but during this time, if you're not familiar with this was a piece of legislation that was passed in 1988 by the then Conservative government and Margaret Thatcher. And this piece of legislation essentially forbid people making any reference in schools. Well, that's actually how it was interpreted, making any reference to homosexuality in schools and in education. And in fact, they also used the reference and the term pretended families and pretended relationships. So if you were in a same-sex relationship or you were the child of a same-sex family, this language was used that talked about pretended families, which even now I find pretty hurtful. But this had a really huge impact on me. I essentially went through all of my formative years and all of my education with zero reference to LGBTQ. It wasn't covered in anything that I ever kind of experienced during my time in school. That also compounded this sort of sense and feeling of not knowing really who I was or being able to understand my identity. There was, however, a particularly kind of seminal moment in my life, which was that in 1997, Ellen DeGeneres came out on an episode of her sitcom. The episode itself was actually called the Puppy episode. They had to give it a code name because it was such a big deal and such a kind of a sort of a strange and alien concept that there was going to be reference to somebody's sexuality on an American sitcom. So this Puppy episode, when it aired in 1997, was watched by 42 million people at the time, including me. And when I watched that program, it was the first time that I ever saw a woman stand up and say, "I'm gay." And she did it in this episode. And up until that point, the only LGBTQ people that I'd sort of saw or had as reference points tended to be either comedians or singers, and they were always guys. There were no female role models at all. But I saw this episode, and I genuinely think it was a very seminal moment for me. It was kind of a bit of an awakening and a sort of an eye-opener. By this point, I had already fallen in love with a woman. I'd already recognized that I was in fact a lesbian. But seeing this on the TV was really, I suppose, kind of very affirming for me. It aired and it received phenomenal response. It was very well received. There was lots of excitement, lots of joy, and lots of kind of celebration about this kind of important moment. However, unfortunately, later on, by the end of that year, her program was axed. And that was the end of her sitcom. The production team, all of the sponsors, all of the companies that were kind of behind this decided this was too hot a topic, too difficult, too sensitive to get involved with. The program was axed. So for me, having gone from this moment of great joy and happiness and seeing something that I could kind of relate to, all of a sudden, I then found myself with this very strong message of this is not okay. And actually, her career kind of came to an end at that moment. It was a really big deal. And this sent a very negative and quite damaging kind of message to me. The good news, of course, is that she resurfaced, and in 2003, so 6 years later, she launched her Ellen DeGeneres chat show, you know, to great acclaim, and went on to kind of run that show for a good many years. But these kind of messages that I was getting, that this wasn't okay, this was going to cause me a problem, it continued to force me back into the closet. I spent a lot of time in the closet. I spent certainly the first part of my career very much closeted, hiding who I was, editing what I said, using the Monday morning pronouns and trying to make sure that I'd kind of got my story straight. And actually, it's incredibly damaging. It's incredibly hard work. It takes a huge amount of cognitive energy and capacity to constantly be trying to pass and trying to think about how you sort of present yourself to the world and not letting too many people know too much about you. Of course, I thought that nobody knew, but actually, I think by that point, probably many people knew that I was gay. But nonetheless, it took me a long time to kind of come to the sort of point of being able to really be sort of open and out at work. And the thing that prompted me actually was quite a long time later. I came out initially, but more recently, the reason I've become sort of more vocal and more visible and started to get very, very involved in advocacy work and our ERG within the organisation and so forth is because I was working with graduates at the time. I was working at Microsoft and I was running the graduate program, the intern program and apprenticeships. And there was a piece of research at that time that was released by the Human Rights Campaign which said that 62% of millennials go back into the closet when they join their first organisation. That, for me, was such a stark reminder of where we are and the challenge that people still face. And for me, I realised that that was kind of my moment to make me step up and get involved and really sort of play a part. So I made a point of referencing my wife, talking about my sexuality, talking about our network, the community, and trying to encourage people to feel like they could come into the organisation and really kind of be themselves right from day one and not do what a lot of people do, which is join the organisation and then spend a long time in the closet before they eventually decide that the time is right for them to actually kind of come out to their colleagues and their teammates. I went from this kind of closeted sort of phase and space into being incredibly out and proud, as you can see from a few of my sort of pictures, which are all kind of work-related things. The one in the middle was our sort of COVID celebration pride, where we were all at home and we couldn't do anything except sort of celebrate with one another virtually. But when I came to work at City, I was very clear about wanting to understand whether this was going to be a safe, welcoming environment for me. And much like one of the earlier speakers referenced, that my identity wasn't going to just be tolerated. I wanted it to be really celebrated. And I think there's a big difference between working somewhere where you feel like people can sort of tolerate you. I don't think any of us wish to be tolerated. We want to be celebrated. We need to get right the way to that celebrating the differences and so forth. So during my interview process, again, I was very clear to make reference to my wife. I talked about the role that I wanted to play within the LGBTQ community at City. I talked about the network. I asked lots of questions about whether there would be an opportunity for me to get involved with that. And I was really, really just checking out and testing to see what kind of response I was going to get. And thankfully, I got a great response from everybody that I interacted with through the stages. And it was very clear that they were welcoming me as me and that I could sort of bring all of that into the workplace. But the point I also kind of want to make here is that this is a picture of us at one of our Pride celebrations. We do Pride pretty well, actually, but the majority, or a very large proportion of people in this picture are actually our allies, and our allies are so incredibly important to us and incredibly important in terms of the progress that we've made. We couldn't have got to where we got to, progressed in the organisation, made the changes that we have made without our allies. Again, referencing what somebody else was speaking about earlier on, allies within the organisation and finding your senior sponsors and so forth is incredibly important when you want to make a change and make the place better. But we also talk about allyship really broadly at City. So I think one of the important things for me is that I don't want allies to simply mean straight people. For me, we need to be allies to one another. We need to be allies to each other within the community. As a marginalised group of people, it's of no value and no help whatsoever if we then decide to create further divisions within the community, in my opinion. Therefore, I try my very best to be an ally to my bi colleagues, to my trans colleagues, to my black colleagues, to people with disabilities. I want to make sure that I use my voice, and again, referencing the privilege, I want to be able to use those things for the better and to kind of enable other people. And one of the things that I think is interesting is that, I referenced there sort of supporting bi colleagues, and, we know, and there's plenty of research again that suggests this, but there's so much biphobia and bi-erasure that still takes place. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the sort of the negative slurs and the little sort of jokes and connotations that people make, thinking they're being sort of funny and witty and actually being blatantly quite sort of biphobic. When you hear people saying things like they just haven't decided yet, or they're just greedy, or buy now, gay later. All of these things serve to continue to create a place where bi people are not recognised, not celebrated, not acknowledged, and their identity is somehow not valid and not validated in the way that others are. So we've done a lot of work trying to make sure that we create a space, and we create time, and we create resources and opportunities to think very specifically about the different identities within our community, and making sure that it's not just focused on perhaps our male gay colleagues, or even, actually, there's not a great deal of out lesbians, I have to say. I'm still looking around and trying to find some more, but not today, obviously. But nonetheless, it's very important that we kind of create that. And going back to kind of the point around the sort of the allies, I think for me, one of the things that has been really important and that I have learnt and spent quite a lot of time and attention on over recent years is actually trying to break down the barriers that prevent people engaging with this topic. So for me, I've found that the majority of my colleagues, and certainly many of our senior leaders, are wholeheartedly behind LGBTQ equality. They want to do the right thing. They want to do what's best for the community. However, they find this a really difficult topic and a really difficult issue to embrace and to get to know. And I think some of that comes down to language. So I always sort of start my sort of training and awareness pieces at work with a sort of a 101 around the terminology. Because let's face it, all of us even in here recognize and know that the language is always evolving, and we're always having to think about how we identify ourselves, how we think about our community and the language that we use. So for me, I start with a very simple, let's talk about the letters, let's talk about what we mean by L and G and B, T, Q, plus, and many other identities, whether that be intersex, asexual, and so forth, and make people kind of comfortable with that, because I strongly believe the fear of saying the wrong thing stops people saying anything at all. And actually, I want to kind of say to my colleagues, it doesn't matter if you get it wrong. I'd rather you just engaged with us, engage with the topic. If you get your G and the B round the wrong way, or you miss a letter, or pop in an extra one, let's not kind of, give people a hard time for that. At least they're trying. At least they're aiming to kind of do better and sort of support us. But I also want to kind of, make a very clear point here around our support for the trans community. It is, of course, this week Trans Awareness Week, which is culminating with our sort of moment on Sunday on the 20th of November every year, when we mark Trans Day of Remembrance, thinking about the shocking number of people that are still facing violence and losing their lives to homophobic hatred and violence and so forth. And I just want to be absolutely clear that I in no way associate myself with the so-called TERFs, the trans exclusionary radical feminists, the gender critical. Not for me. I'm not remotely interested. I don't believe that equality is like a pie or a cake. There aren't a finite amount of pieces to go around. If somebody else has greater equality, it doesn't detract from my equality. So I want to be really clear, and always at work and in any environment, to say that I stand very clearly with my trans colleagues and with the trans community, and make sure that we kind of continue to make that very clear. There is, in my opinion at the moment, a very, very, very highly organised, well-funded campaign of hate directed at the trans community, which is being kind of played out through social media and even main press. So I think all of us have a role to play here. We can all do better in making sure that we support trans people and make sure that we are recognising their identities and showing value for who they are. Final kind of couple of things I want to sort of just cover here is that I'm sure you have heard many people many times talking about bring your whole self to work. That's fine, but actually it can be really challenging and really difficult. And actually to bring your whole self to work and to feel like you can actually open up and share that side of yourselves with people means that you do have to make yourself quite vulnerable. If I think even 10 years ago, the idea of me standing here and talking to a group like this and talking about me and my identity would have been a really preposterous idea. And you do have to make yourself vulnerable, and I do believe that it takes courage. And I think, I'm very drawn to Professor Brené Brown's sort of definition of vulnerability, where she sort of really says there needs to be sort of three elements: uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. Are all things which will come about if you are making yourself vulnerable. The important thing I would say is that by making myself vulnerable and by bringing my whole self to work, I have really felt the benefits massively. And again, there's lots of research that shows how much more productive and satisfied people can be if they are able to be out at work. The research suggests people can be up to 32% more productive, and I'm still yet to find a single organisation or manager that doesn't want their people to be 32% more productive. So it's a bit of a win-win. And it does genuinely speak to that point that one of the speakers was making earlier about the business case and the dollars, the pounds, the bottom line of businesses. Getting this stuff right and creating inclusive environments and inclusive cultures isn't just a nice to do, it's an absolute business imperative if you want to succeed and do well and compete in the market. Whilst I don't want this kind of to look like it's all about me, obviously it is all about me, but there's a reason for this, which is I have found myself in a position over recent years where I've been lucky enough and I'm genuinely honoured and humbled that I've been awarded a number of awards and included on various lists and so forth, receiving some really great external recognition. Younger me could never have ever envisaged this happening. Closeted me, who was hiding who I was, could never ever have imagined that this would happen. And the thing that I hold so dear and why I find this so incredibly important is that these are nominations that have been made by people, by colleagues, by people that I work with. I don't know actually on some occasions who's nominated me, but the fact that people have seen me as a role model I find to be an absolute honour. And I genuinely do, you know, I'm not joking when I say an accidental role model. I didn't ever envisage that happening. I don't think you can choose to be a role model, but I do think if people identify you as one, then you can try and do the best you can and be the best role model. And I do that just simply by being very authentic about me and my life and who I am and so forth. So, very final point before I wrap up. I have actually spoken before and talked about me finding this ability to kind of be me and share who I am as a bit of a superpower. It's given me huge inner strength. It's also afforded me some really fabulous opportunities through work, which I'm you know, very delighted to have had. But actually, the point I want to make here is that this is really, I want you to kind of think about leadership. And every single one of you in this room have the opportunity, the ability to go into your organizations and to be great leaders. Leadership doesn't equate to job title or seniority or tenure within the business. Some of the best leaders that I've worked with have been very junior folks in the organization. And I think all of you have the opportunity to go into the organization and be great leaders and show other people who you are, what you're all about, and hopefully inspire folks around you to also feel able to be themselves. So I'm going to leave it there and just ask you if there's any questions. If we have time.
Time for one question. Or two.
Stunned silence, oh dear.
Thank you so much. This has been super interesting. And I wonder, you mentioned, you know, that 62% of people go back in the closet when they come in the workplace. What have kind of been the most kind of effective measures that you think, you know, can be implemented kind of maybe even quick or longer term, you know, that you can do to easily reduce this number? Because obviously this is a horrendous number that should be reduced to zero after all, but you know, what can we do to make that change?
Yeah, great. One thing that we've started doing, or actually a couple of things we've started doing recently, which is we're getting much more proactive at City about LGBTQ recruitment. So we've been running insight events. We've been doing that with our early career population, but also with experienced hires. So if you're interested in a career at City, keep an eye out on our social channels or connect with me on LinkedIn and I can give you some details when we do that again. But by actually being very proactive, we've been able to kind of show who we are and what we're all about. The second thing is that particularly with our early career talent, we now make sure that during their insights, whether it's spring insight, whether it's their summer placements or when they join us as full-time, we always make sure that we get our network in front of that group. We have panel discussions, we invite them to kind of round tables, just to really sort of cement that message that actually we're here with the great community that you can kind of join and be part of, and that we can share our experiences. I genuinely think that people sharing their experiences and telling stories is the way that we change hearts and minds and the way that we make the place better.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, in the interest of time, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great speech. Next up, we have Carrie Reiners from ATK.
Oh, I've got this one. Hi. Hi, everyone. It's really, really nice to be with you. My name is Carrie. I am the Deputy CEO at AKT. We are the UK's charity working with young LGBTQ people who are facing homelessness. And we've titled this presentation, Finding Pathways. We talk a lot in our business around pathways because there's no single way to get help and safety to a young person. And hopefully, by the end of this, I can blend in some pathways for all of you who may find yourselves also working with charities. So a little bit about me and my pathway to AKT. Like I said, my name is Carrie. My pronouns are she, her. I'm here very much as an ally. I discovered AKT through doing some volunteer work at a winter night shelter. And winter night shelters happen all over London and throughout the country. And they typically work November through March. That's winter, I guess, in this country. And they are a frontline emergency service that a lot of charities will make use of. So there's a really good referral system between charities working together. And for us, that means housing. So back in 2016, I was volunteering most weeks at a project that takes place in my neck of the woods in North London, not too far from here. And I was doing almost a weekly shift during the 7-week period. This is a North London project in Camden. It uses a whole network of churches to house the people who are part of C4WS is what it's called. So I was there. It was the first week my church was hosting this, and I signed up to help. Most weeks I had some time, and I was doing an overnight shift because we always have a female volunteer because they're both, it's a male and female project. So I was there. I was sleeping overnight. I was also doing breakfast in the morning. Secretly, I would love to have some cafe, but not really. So this allowed me to do that. And I met this group of young people who all seemed to know each other, about 3, sometimes 4, and they were there every week. And I got to know a young woman called Emily. And she had an AKT shirt on, and I'd never seen the logo. And at that time, we were formerly known as Albert Kennedy Trust. So I asked her, what's AKT? And she talked about a charity. In the real world, nobody says things like LGBTQ youth homelessness. But she talked about this charity that was supporting her and finding a pathway, and had referred her into this project. And as the weeks went on, we all knew each other. And it was really a positive experience. When I went home, I read about AKT because I'd volunteered a lot in lots of different homeless projects, both here in the UK and in America, where I'm from. But I hadn't really put together the LGBT element. So I went home and did a little bit of research. And there were some facts that I'll take you through in this presentation about how the LGBTQ community is disproportionately affected. So I've kind of filed that away in my brain, and 2-3 months later, they were looking for a director of fundraising, which is my background. So I immediately, and my background has always been arts and cultural, very big museums, really, really good cultural collateral for the community, but not a frontline service. But I immediately started hounding the CEO and saying I really wanted to make this change, and I felt that this was a great organization for me to bring those skills. So I joined in 2016 as the director of fundraising. In 2020, for some reason, I took on the additional responsibility of deputy CEO. So I'm still looking after income generation, but also the day-to-day running, kind of like people and operations aspects of our work. Dealing with funding is a lot easier than dealing with people, so I question this decision quite often. But really, it's been an amazing journey for me to be able to work on that frontline network, to be able to see funding, which often comes from companies like Jackie's. We've worked together on a few projects, and to see that literally walking out of our door. So a little bit about our work. We were founded in 1989, and I overheard a bit of Jackie's presentation. That was the time of Section 28. And 1989 is when that restrictive legislation came into force. You will find several LGBT charities with the founding date of 1989, because it also energized the community to take active steps to repeal that legislation. Sadly, it lasted, as she said, till 2020, something like that, or 2000. So we were founded in a very grassroots, just people coming together. I have heard real horror stories that we started out with just a phone number in Gay Times and Diva magazine. Do you need a safe place to stay? We have a lot more safeguarding now, I promise. But that was really how it started. It was a kitchen table type charity. But we started to grow, and we're now fully national. We have offices in London, Manchester, Newcastle, Bristol, and we're about to open a 5th in Birmingham later this year. So we also work digitally, because as we went into lockdown, as everyone else, we started working online. We had huge numbers of young people coming to us from outside of those, at that time, 4 key regions. So we started to develop models that allowed us to directly assist a young person into safe accommodation no matter where they were. So a little bit about the background of the work that we do. First and foremost, we're here to provide safe accommodation. We do that through a whole network, as I discussed a little bit about winter night shelters, but we also use hotels, we use hostels, we use other supported accommodation, depending on what's best for the young person. And our caseworkers work really one-to-one on a holistic service, so that we make sure that young people are taking advantage of mental health support, budgeting and financing. I'll talk a little bit about that and how the cost of living crisis is bearing down on young people in particular. And making sure that they build that resilience and independence. So we do lots of social events, we do lots of informative workshops, lots of things to make sure that young people have that resilience so that they can make their own independence and stay independent. We're very lucky that turbo boost that we can give somebody between the ages of 16 and 25 really helps to prevent lifetimes of homelessness, that recurring cycle that so often happens. So when I, as I mentioned, started looking at the charity, two things stood out to me, is that what we know, and we're about to redo this research, so I'm excited to see, hopefully this number does not go up, but we feel that it very much will, but it's 1 in 4 young people facing homelessness who are 16 to 25 would identify as LGBTQ. So that is disproportionate to the wider general population. And that 77% of young people that come to us say it's their families and more so the wider community that has caused them to have that crisis. So we see all kinds of issues. We have young people coming to us saying their parents have asked them to leave, or maybe they've had to leave for their own safety. See a lot of domestic violence. We see young people being transported to home countries where perhaps they've never even visited, forced marriage, lots of domestic abuse, either from partners or families. So it's quite a tricky, full-on work that we're doing besides just sorting out housing and homelessness. So we work with that. I feel that I have the best job in the organization because I get to come out and meet with people who can make that change. So certainly we've seen our numbers really on the rise. So in the first phase of lockdown, we saw a 113% increase in demand for our services. And overall throughout the pandemic, that's remained about a 71% increase from before. So it is getting very tough for young people out there. And young people are coming to us with very complex needs. So again, we're looking at how we develop those services to help them to be resilient and gain their independence. So some of the other ways that our work has changed in recent years, when I joined, we saw about 16% of the young people that came to us identified as trans. That is now 49%, and I expect it to be well over 50 when we calculate that at the end of this year. And so that you will all know that there's quite a lot of attacks on the trans community in the media and from all sides. So that is really, really kind of informing our service and how we work. So we're really, really proud that this year we've developed what's called a trans pathway. There's that word again, pathway. Which is it's based in our Manchester office, but it really feeds throughout all the work and making sure that everything we do from the first level of intake through all of our assessments, through every referral partner that we have, is making sure that it's trans affirmative for those young people. And we are very grateful to have some amazing funding to do this, and so that will last for 3 years, and at that time, we know that everything will be kind of ticking along, and we'll probably continue to have that specialist support within our charity, and we're really, really proud to be able to support that in the terms of our growth. So that is a key issue. We deal with a level of homelessness, which you may read somewhat about, which is called hidden homelessness. So we don't deal with a lot of rough sleeping, although we do see that on the increase. So hidden homelessness is young people who might be sofa surfing, young people who might be indulging in a 24-hour lifestyle. They may be making lots of decisions around risky behavior to avoid either going home or perhaps sleeping rough or staying on a bus all night. So there's a lot of sexual exploitation in our work, young people are just very, very vulnerable in this, when they find themselves in this issue of not having that support at home. And so we have a youth engagement program that on top of all the people kind of like busy bees working around and sorting out housing and homelessness issues and mental health issues, but looking at that kind of key life skills for young people. We want to make sure that young people can remain independent and also to build their own communities, because they know that they don't have their own communities. They may have been rejected from home and unable to rejoin their communities. A lot of faith and culture is also the main driver of that rejection by family. So there's a lot of work to be done in bringing young people together and helping them to make their own communities. I think within the LGBT community, there's often a logical family rather than biological family, and that's something that we want to be able to assist with as well. And then I wanted to share with you a case study, and our plans was for one of our caseworkers to join and to talk a little bit about that. But this is a young person that we worked with last year and has now sustaining his independence after a critical few months with us. It just represents a lot of the issues that we're seeing, and also certainly the cost of living. So this young person is called Harry, and he's a trans man who actually wasn't leaving home, but was leaving supported accommodation. So they had very high special needs and had been living in supported accommodation because also they were deemed to be homeless. So Harry was in supported accommodation, but made his way through to actually gaining employment with a 16-hour contract, which, living in London, as you can imagine, that is not going to get you very far. But the rules of supported accommodation and in the age of austerity meant that Harry could not stay in that housing project because he was employed. But very soon, obviously, that was not going to be a safe situation. So we know that the longer that a young person is at risk of homelessness, the more vulnerable they are. And so luckily, Harry had been referred to AKT through a friend. So a friend had known of our work and sent him to us. We are a direct referral service. A young person can just go on our website and request a meeting. We have a live chat that kind of pops up on our website. They can refer themselves that way. They can ring us on the phone. That doesn't happen very often. Or they can show up at our office. That used to happen. We don't see that so much since the pandemic. But Harry had received this job, which was a real boost to his mental health, and also was the groundwork for starting a career in hospitality, which was his path. So we worked with him. He spent a few weeks sofa surfing before he got to us. And he did spend some time sleeping rough in a park in London. But of course, this was putting his job at jeopardy. He was being very resilient and finding ways to still make it to work despite not having a safe place to sleep. But he knew that his mental health was declining, and he approached his local authority, who did not recognize him as homeless. And that is something that we see time and time again. Many of the young people who we work with face multiple oppressions. They come from minority communities. And then when they do seek help, people don't always recognize the specific issues of young LGBT people. So we've done some research in this area and are launching a new program around maintaining best practice for local authorities, for housing associations, to be able to educate them through an online kind of subscription portal so that they recognize the needs of young people. We did some research over the last year. Only 16% of housing associations have inclusive titles or pronouns when you're filling out those forms. So young people often will just not recognize themselves in that and not be able to seek help. They also, about 42% had never had any diversity and inclusion training. So I heard Jackie talking a little bit about that EDI work, that all of us are on that journey it kind of hasn't happened in that sector yet. So that's something that we're looking to improve. Because when Harry approached his local authority, they said he was employed and he could go home, but home was not a safe place. So when he came to us, we put in a kind of an emergency action plan and supported him through a brief stay in a hotel and then a brief stay at an LGBT friendly and trans-affirmative youth hostel that we work with quite a lot in the city. And that also allowed him to meet other LGBTQ young people, which he didn't have a very big social network. So he worked hard, building up his skills, and while maintaining his employment as well. And he went to various workshops with us and had some mental health counseling that we were able to put in place for him. Eventually, he was able to receive some help through a housing association. Sadly, it is not in London. It's just outside of London, but he is able to maintain that commute and to keep his job. And he's been able to do some training and is actually getting a promotion, which we're very, very proud of, and is working towards a full-time contract on that. So that's just a little brief experience of what a young person may be facing and the types of jobs actually that they're facing. They're not always going to be moving into the world of banking or even education or many of the different sectors that are reflected here. And I think that's something that's really important for everyone to reflect on, is that everyone has a different journey. I know Jackie touched on people going back into the closet. We have a lot of young people who are never able to come out of the closet. And so as you move into that world of work or return to that world of work after studying, recognize that amongst your colleagues. And be an ally for all of the community or an ally to the LGBT community. So some other work that we're working on and really proud to be developing is continuing our digital service. That has proved invaluable. I met a young person on Tuesday. We were having a celebration to open our Bristol office. And a young person came and spoke. She is now housed in Cardiff, and that was their first trip to England. So it was really interesting. But when they first approached us, they were from a very rural, remote community in Wales. And so the safest thing for them was to be able to move to a bigger city where she's now able to sustain her education as well. So there's not one pathway. And so I know a lot of you, it was a really interesting conversation for me when we were approached by EUROUT. I think it's gone through kind of the horses around AKT. I think it started with our CEO, and it's kind of worked its way around. But looking at that idea that many people doing an MBA are also looking at going into the fields of CSR in a company or working in diversity inclusion. My husband did his MBA a long, long time ago, something called the 90s. Many of you might not have even been there then. There was no pathway for that at that time. So he was trying to do something called the internet, and there was no real field for that either at that time. So it's a pathway within working within the corporate community for charities like us, particularly frontline charities. There are fields of things. I think I also overheard one of the speakers in the last session talk about working with charities and that importance of giving time and resources, financial resources in particular, is really, really invaluable because it does mean the difference to somebody being safe or somebody being at risk of many, many different vulnerabilities. And there's lots of ways to work with charities, and charities come in all shapes and sizes. I've worked at lots. None of them are the same. We're a little bit chaotic. We can never move as fast as a lot of our corporate partners, but it is a very good experience, I think, maybe to get that background, besides just looking at the work and how you might support it, but how the charity does it work, how it does its work, and then bringing in how your company might be able to support in a different way to kind of get that zigzagged pathway that we're all on in the sector. So I'm not sure how we're doing on time, but does anybody have any questions, comments, witty criticisms.
We have time for just
happy.
one question, and then usually
For that?
5. This time's 1. Okay, if there's no
Okay.
question, Carrie will be around for you to
Great.
ask questions on after the stage.
Perfect.
Next up, we have our very own Alberto Padilla. He's also a MBA graduate from LBS back in 2017.
All right. Excellent. Well, it's very nice to be here. It's a real pleasure to be with all of you today. I'll quickly introduce myself. So, Alberto Padilla, as you were saying, I'm an LBS alum, proud member of EUROUT's board. And I actually, I've been involved with this conference for quite some years in different ways. And I work as a vice president at Inside Partners. I'm head of global corporate partnerships. It's a large venture capital and private equity software investor. So anyways, I'll get started. But I want to start with a raise of hands. And the first thing I would like to ask everyone here, I see a lot of young people, is why did you decide to do an MBA? Was it maybe for the academics? If you can. No one interested in the academics? All right. Well, I was probably on that boat too. What about transitioning to a new industry or a new career, a new company? Okay, so quite a few. That was definitely in that case. What about having a good time and just traveling around the world, going to, yeah, well, that was certainly me, highest. Okay, how about building a network? Some of you. And for me, it was certainly one of the reasons why I decided to join, but it wasn't certainly the most important reason why I decided to do it. I think now that I look back, it was certainly one of the most important and the biggest value adds that I got out of the MBA program. So the one follow-up question to that is, how much time do we actually spend learning how to build a network? And I'm certainly not an expert in the topic. I am not a published author. So all I can do is share a little bit of my experience through the past couple of years, both at EUROUT, but also more in general after that. So I want to take you all in a little bit of a journey. So I'm going to the first week of my MBA, so very similar to what all of you had a couple of years ago, or a couple of weeks ago, or maybe months ago. And I'm arriving to a new city. I have no friends, no family. It's difficult to open a bank account, difficult to find a place, because to find a place you need a bank account, but to get a bank account you need an address, and those things that I don't know how in the UK people have managed to do it. But we at some point managed, and the most important thing for me was all of those complexities, obviously, where it needed to be addressed, but the most important thing for me was living my truth. And what that meant was really being my authentic self. I wasn't out of the closet up until then. A couple of people knew about myself, but not necessarily, close friends. I wasn't open at work. And I think that hiding something so big made it difficult to build close relationships, because there was always something that you kept with you. So I joined out in business, kind of forcing myself to out myself. And I was like, if I join this club, there's no way I can go back, like I'm there. So long story short, before I had my first exam, I was probably more concerned about getting speakers and sponsors and getting all the people to join. And obviously, I had no networks and no connections, as I mentioned earlier. But I did have something, which is this beautiful and colorful community. So with that, I kind of set myself on a bit of a mission. And fast forward a couple of months, and we had some amazing speakers, some amazing people that we met that I see still sitting here after so many years. We had the Prime Minister of Luxembourg that apparently we had a connection through the LBS alum. We had Todd Pierce, the Chief Digital Officer at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and all these amazing speakers and sponsors that still continue to support this conference. And the reality is that I didn't stop then. I continued to build this network, and actually this experience helped me realize how important it is to have one. And I think I learned a couple of things and to get a little bit better at it. So I was thinking about this, and when the committee asked me to join, I was thinking, well, what would be the main things? And typically, as a former consultant, you do 3 or 5, but I only had 4 good things to say, so I'm going to stick to 4. And the first one is to proactively start building your support network. And professional networking requires a bit of a more strategic approach. Strategic is not to be confused with tactical, right? We're talking about people here. But also, it is true that unstructured networking doesn't necessarily yield the results that a lot of the people would be necessarily looking for. So as a first step in building this proactively building this support network, it's taking advantage of opportunities like this one. I mean, there's a lot of industry events. EUROUT's a great example where you're meeting like-minded individuals. This is, in my opinion, where genuine relationships are built, and those are worth gold. And the reason why is because you don't know who's sitting beside you, who's going to be the next CEO, or he's going to be the next founder of the biggest company in the world, the next Amazon, or whatever that is. And you're only building these connections on the personal attributes that you find, not on who they are or what they are. Everyone's at equal leveling doing an MBA program, and I think that's the most amazing way to meet people, and certainly some of my closest friends still trace back to those days when I was doing my MBA, and obviously previously in undergrad and whatnot. The reality is that there's no way that you're going to know and have an extensive enough network to get to where you need to get all the time. So there's other ways in which you can do it. There's warm referrals, which is what I call them. They definitely go a long way. There's this thing around everyone saying that we're 2 degrees of separation away from everyone, and to some extent it is true. So take advantage, and it sounds pretty obvious, but I don't think everyone realizes that, LinkedIn, you can see who's connected, and warm referrals go a long way because you're getting basically that seal of approval or stamp of approval from someone that actually you trust or and that you want to actually spend time because you are doing it maybe as a favor to that someone, or because you know that that person would only send you someone that they would appreciate as someone worth spending the time with. Sometimes there's no way to get connected to someone and you need to do cold reach outs, and that is okay. I mean, it does feel slightly self-serving. You're reaching out to someone because you have something in particular that you want to get to or say. But the one thing that you should think about is putting time into your requests. So why do you want to speak to this person? Why is it important for you to actually speak to this particular person? And I think it's pretty obvious, and I'm sure everyone in this room has even gotten invites and requests from people wanting to learn more about your job, wanting to learn more about how to get into an MBA program that literally looks like they just changed the name. Sometimes they even forget to change the name, has happened. And it's obviously not a way you would never want to reply to that, because if they don't have the time to do that, why would you want to give your time? So that's number one. Number two is nurturing your relationships. And obviously with relationship building, it's a bit of a give and take. The one thing that I was thinking about the other day when I was thinking about what I was going to say is that we all have a superpower. We're very empathic. We're naturally, and a lot of us have higher levels of EQ because of what we had to experience to be here today. And this is a very important point because it's a foundational element for relationship building. So all of us in here have a higher sensitivity on average probably than the majority of the population. And that is really, really critical when you're building relationships. The second point is that it takes time to build a network and also to maintain a network, to maintain friendships. So I typically categorize all of the people that I spend time with into 4 different categories or buckets. The first one are those that are core relationships to me, so family, my partner, friendships, and all of the people that I kind of like keep me moving. Then there's like kind of second degree of separation, which are business relationships, your colleagues. A lot of them, in my case, are almost like close to friendships. We spend a lot of time with them. They know me really well. And then you have that third category, which are personal and professional acquaintances. There's a fourth category that I think, in my opinion, sometimes gets forgotten, and yet is one of the most powerful ones, and that is passion-driven relationships. Having a shared passion or a common ground is the biggest relationship accelerator that you can find. And this category applies both in personal and professional settings. As I hope many of you will be managing people when you're back out there. I always, I think about this, and a good manager knows the name of your employees' partners, and you know who they are, and their partners, and their names, and the name of the children if they have children. I think an outstanding manager will also know their deepest passions and actually try and connect with them through those passions. I have people in my team that are fanatics about Formula One, and I certainly am not that big of a fan, but I can appreciate Charles Leclerc and some really interesting people there. So there's ways in which you can connect with these people. And what I'm trying to say is that building that connection is always important. Going back into the nurturing relationship side, it's impossible to set up one-to-one coffees with everyone, give time to everyone, even if you want to. So for those time-poor people, which is most of us, it's always good to find opportunities to bring groups of people together. And I find that is a personal pleasure that I have, is inviting people, whether for gatherings or dinners, and it just takes someone to organize the dinner. Bring people from different backgrounds, walks in life, different ages. I think being part of this community is one of those things that allows us to meet people that are not only in our age group, but that are literally the people that set the foundation for our community, that you can still connect through because we're all part of this network. And I think EUROUT is a great example of one of these events where you meet people from different countries, different places, and bringing all of these people together at once allows you to maintain and nurture that community as it goes. So defining your purpose, this is the third point, and that's the title of my segment. So obviously I had to talk about this. So obviously as the first step is defining that purpose. And me personally, I'm very passionate about the LGBT community. It comes from a personal struggle that I'm sure I'm shared with a lot of you. I also recognize all the people that allow me to be here today, my friends, my mentors, my colleagues. And obviously, as a whole, the advancement of the LGBT community has become a bit of a personal purpose for me. And the reality is that it doesn't need to be a weekend activity. It's not a thing that I do on Sunday evenings. And I think for me, the biggest shift has actually had this convergence of personal purpose with my professional life. And to go back, when I graduated from LBS, I certainly didn't want to go to the closet, and we were just mentioning that earlier in the previous presentation. It happens, some people don't even come out of the closet, but for me, I had made that journey, and I certainly didn't want to go back. So when I joined a consulting firm. I joined Bain & Company after my MBA, and I was very much immediately joined by a family of consultants, more than 40 LGBT consultants just in the London office. I raised my hand to be the head for the BGLAD, which is their LGBT affinity network at Bain. And I was very much involved because for me, this part of me was very important, and I wanted to do all the consulting work, but also be in a network, in a community that allowed me to continue this, which I loved. At some point, I decided to change jobs. And it was a bit of a concern. I was going from consulting, which is very much supportive of the community, to another industry. The company had no affinity network. The leadership team did not look as diverse. I knew that through the interview process, they were supportive about DE&I, but it wasn't necessarily the same space. And I remember in my final interview, one of the partners that finally interviewed me said, you know, Alberto, it is true that we don't have what you have in your previous job, but we do have the interest in building something, and it takes the first person to do it. So for me, that was a clear buy-in that I was going to bring my passion to work, and I was going to take the lead into building something internally, hopefully with their sponsorship. And again, with challenge always comes opportunity. So when I joined Inside, there were myself and another LGBT open investor. I knew other LGBT people in the community. I knew some in this firm and some in the other private equity and venture capital and whatnot. And all of them were facing similar situations where the companies were too small to have a network or just simply didn't have anyone. So we, three friends and I decided to create Out Investors, which is a network of 500 members now. We have 5 chapters globally. And we literally used our personal connections to get buy-in, to get companies to sponsor and join the network, to get people to sign up. And that was a very interesting point because for me it was that first time that I realized transitioning from a personal network to actually building an ecosystem of people that were interested in coming together for a particular reason. And actually today's a pretty special day, not only because I'm here with you, but we're launching Insight's LGBT affinity group. It's called Outside later today. So it took 4 years, but we finally got there. We have 30 members, so that's to be said as well. Is like it takes time, but eventually we get there. And for those that are going into industries that are maybe less diverse, change is happening. Maybe not as fast as we would like to, but it's certainly happening. And the last thing I want to make on this point is people respect when you have a point of view, whether it's your passion and whether they share your passion or not, and you have something that you can bring. The bolder the dream and the passion, the better. It makes you memorable. People will remember about, oh, you're the guy that is trying to create that thing, and whatever happened, did you do it? So it actually makes you a bit of those unique traits in your fingerprints that make you special and unique. So you should see it as an asset. And my final point, which is to get in the business of asking for help. And I think for a lot of people, it just doesn't come naturally. And I guess the overarching thought about this is that even the people that you think that have no value to you actually have something to offer. Yesterday, and there's some networking events, you will always find the person that is like, oh, are you in consult? No, okay, bye, and like almost push you to the side, and you're like, whoa, like that was not subtle. And people that don't get that, they've missed the entire point. Networking is about finding the different types of value in every person. And I think this is a point that's at its core the most important thing about networking, which is understanding what can someone bring you, and it's not necessarily what you had originally intended to get out of that person. So let me go back to the story that I started at the beginning of my segment. Basically organized EUROUT, all that went well, joined consulting, and 3 years after, one good day, I get a very nice, interesting message on LinkedIn from our recruiter, and it's basically my dream job. I didn't have the qualifications. It was a bit of a stretch role, to be honest, but I was determined that I wanted that role. And I started going through my network. I started looking at the website of the company, trying to find if there was any connection that I could find, any in into the company. And literally, I stumbled into this random YouTube video, and in a split of a second, I see the face of Todd Pierce, the speaker that I had invited to come to EUROUT 4 years ago. So I reached out on LinkedIn, dropped him a nice note, and said why I wanted this job so bad and how he could help me. The long story short is that the next day, I get a reply from him. It didn't happen to be that he was only at an event organized by my firm, but he was also the mentor of the operating partner, the managing partner of the team that I'm part of. So by the end of the week, I was in the interview process, and what was interesting as well was talking to my boss now. And when I asked him why did he hire me, he said, there's a lot of predictive assessments. We can look at your grades, we can look at your qualifications, but having that resourcefulness, having to navigate your network to get to us, to put you in the round, is what distinguished some of the other candidates. And I think for all of us, those are the type of attributes that are going to become more important as you go back into the workforce. And these are the type of differentiators that are going to actually make a difference in terms of you getting that dream job that you want. The reason why I wanted to share that story is because you cannot connect the dots forward. You can only do so, and after time, when you look backwards, you see the different circumstances, me ending up in LBS, joining EUROUT, inviting this random person that accepted the invite, and all the people that got you to that point. And of course, there's always a bit of a dose of serendipity in all relationships, because you don't know where they're going to take you. So with that, I really want to thank Julia, Cam, everyone in the committee for this opportunity to be with you today. This is a great networking chance for everyone, so I hope that you all meet some amazing people, some interesting people, and who knows, perhaps some life-defining relationships. Thank you.
Next up, we have a quick short video from our dean from London Business School. He's what's standing between you and lunch, so.
Hello everyone, my name is François Hortalot-Magnier, and my pronouns are he, him, and I'm the Dean of London Business School. The EUROUT conference is an important moment for the LBS community, and it's incredibly valuable to LBS. Our school is committed to driving LGBTQ+ inclusion within our own community and beyond. I'm sorry I'm unable to be with you in person for EUROUT this year, but we are launching our Forever Forward campaign, which requires me to be in New York this week. Out in business, I've worked tirelessly to put this conference together. And the theme for this year, laying the foundations for success, has been so eloquently reflected from the investment in local LGBTQ+ talent in the form of comedians performing this weekend, to the diversity of identities reflected in the speakers and participants, and the exciting debut of the EUROUT scholarship. A core pillar to our Forever Forward campaign is to raise funds for essential scholarships, which is why I'm so proud and pleased to see the dedicated work of Out in Business in founding the new EUROUT scholarship, as this is very much in line with the goals we have for Forever Forward. This scholarship will provide an additional pathway for an LGBTQ+ student to access world-class education at LBS. And I want to thank Out in Business for their leadership in building that scholarship. Thanks also to the corporate sponsors whose generosity makes this financial opportunity a reality. Continuing the theme of laying the foundations of success, I want to share two key initiatives impacting the LBS community. Earlier in the year, we launched a trans equality policy, and we're having conversation as to how pronouns are used in our everyday interactions. Both initiatives are being led by Out in Business and Proud, our staff LGBTQ+ network. Our purpose at London Business School is to have a profound impact on the way the world does business and the way business impacts the world. For us to be successful in this mission, we all need to do our part to work together and create more awareness around issues impacting LGBTQ+ people and other marginalized communities, to then identify tangible, measurable, goal-oriented solutions for us to execute and to hold ourselves accountable, in particular to the commitments to allyship we must make each day. This responsibility falls on me as well. I know there are more things we can do to support and amplify LGBTQ+ people at LBS, so that everyone feels a true sense of belonging here. We are not yet where we want to be, and I believe it's important to acknowledge that while we have made several great strides, such as having conferences like this, by no means are we finished. There's more work to do. And I'm committed to continue driving change and to provide leadership. I would like to thank the Out in Business Club for their tireless efforts, for their leadership, vision, and execution with EUROUT. This is a phenomenal conference, and I'm so proud to have this club as part of our LBS ecosystem. And I feel extremely grateful for all the work they've done to put this conference together. I hope all of you have a wonderful weekend together, and I'm cheering you on from across the pond. I look forward to continuing powerful conversations with our students and all my colleagues, like the ones that will be held this weekend at LBS. Let's drive positive change forward together. Thank you all.